Okay, first off, thanks. Thank you very much. This is, I don't quite know how to explain it. My season that I feel like identifies what I am was as a firefighter, and this NFPA stuff just kind of evolved, and now that's how you're kind of recognized, but I'm a firefighter. That's what I am. I can tell you that some of these things that I hope to talk about today, and some will be briefly and some will hopefully be a little more in detail, we spend a tremendous amount of time because of the location of the NFPA back in Quincy, Massachusetts, out of Boston, talking to organizations on the East Coast, and some of these issues are so passionate, have such a heart issue that every time I'm doing it, I can't help but start thinking about home. And we've had alerts come out with the NFPA, we've had alerts come out with NIOSH, we've been talking about this stuff in various magazines, but there's nothing like just being home. And I feel home now, I feel comfortable. I'm around my brothers and sisters, and I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it. Some of these things, as I said, they really have developed a passion and a heart issue with me and others, because very often what we do in the NFPA is somewhat theoretical and philosophical. We do a lot of what-ifing, and we try to forecast what could happen in the future. What I'm going to talk about today in some part are not those theoretical, philosophical things, but I'm talking about firefighters that have names that are no longer with us. They died in the line of duty. And that's a dangerous job we have. We're going to lose firefighters. But as I hope to share with you, some of the stuff we found out was quite surprising and quite compelling, and it just really took us by surprise. And I don't mean just myself and the members of the committee, but those in the scientific world that were really trying to solve a problem that all of a sudden something else came up. So anyway, the first thing I'm going to talk about, and this will just take a very, very short amount of time, but as I go around the country talking time and time again, I hear people, especially us, the firefighters, go, those good-for-nothing piece of dogs in the NFPA, they're making all these standards, and they're driven by this, and they're driven by that. And so I wanted to just take a second to try to address that so that you know exactly who sits on this committee. And more importantly than who sits on the committee, I don't want us to get bogged down with the formality of how to fill out proposal forms and how to get involved in the NFPA.org and so on and so forth. At the end of the presentation, I've left my phone number that goes to me and my address. So what I'm really hoping is we talk today, and perhaps somebody else sees this in the state, that they'll pick up the phone and call me when they have something they're concerned about, or they don't like, or they think we need to change. And just give me a call. That's all I really hope you to do. So anyway, I'm going to go over the NFPA 1981. I'm also going to go over the 2013 changes for the NFPA 1981 SCBA. What we do in NFPA 1981 is we develop minimum standards for SCBA and SARS, supplied air respirators. That's what we do. Primarily what drives our standard is performance. We very seldom deal with testing criteria or design as an upfront item. What usually drives the standard is performance. Something didn't work right, something we thought was going to do something didn't do that. We're very, very closely tied into the NIOSH fire fatality investigators. So very, very often, in fact, when they have a close call or they have a fatality, I get a phone call that evening. And they bring the information to myself and the committee regarding what the SCBA's performance or perhaps lack of performance was. So that's usually what drives our committee. That usually drives why we change the standard. Our standard is a 5-year standard. Very often then that performance change makes design change. And so when we see things change with an SCBA, and we visually see it change, it usually is a result of a performance change. And then, of course, we develop testing criteria. This takes up a tremendous amount of our workload because we have to write testing criteria so that it can be sent to various labs, and we are assured it's going to be tested exactly the same every time so that the firefighter ends up with an SCBA that meets the standard every time, regardless of the manufacturer. So this is it. Our committee is made up of 30 members. Typically, we have 31 members on our committee now. We have 31 alternates, so we have 62 members on our committee. The members that can only vote, though, are the principal members or the alternate when the principal member is not in attendance. And out of the 9 membership categories, only 30% of any one of those groups can dominate a particular membership category. So we don't have, obviously, the votes dominated by 90% being not only just firefighters, but manufacturers or whoever it might be. So 30% is the maximum that any membership category can be. As I said earlier, we have 9 membership categories in the NFPA, the makeup of the committee. There's 9 of those. The biggest of those are manufacturers. 29% of the committee is made up of manufacturers. The next is researchers and testers. That becomes 23%, next largest group within our committee. And the most coveted and the ones that really make a tremendous impact on our committee, 19% of our committee is made up of users. Those are firefighters. Those are the ones that put the SCBA on their back. The next one, 13%, are enforcers. Those are the ones that take the standard and actually apply it in training, in their organizations, their documents, so on and so forth. That is 13%. Special experts, 6%. Those are ones that were part of the committee that have since retired or become not affiliated with their original organization. They have a special expertise. We bring them back. They make up 6% of our committee. Labor, 6%. Those are typically representatives of the union, either the internationals or the locals. 3% are consumers. That's who buys the SCBA. That's who actually purchases it, puts it on our back. And the last 2 are insurance, of which we have none, and maintainers and installers. So long and short of it, what's unique about our committee is 50% of our committee are firefighters, real firefighters. They haven't read about it, they haven't saw a movie, they do the job. And so we're very, very lucky to have that kind of number. Half of our committee are real firefighters. So that's who's actually trying to do what they're trying to do regarding SCBA and what we do in our committee. Doesn't mean we get it right, doesn't mean we make the right decisions, but I can guarantee you the commitment that they have is one that is very, very dedicated to the end user and the firefighter. But we need all of our help. Every time we have proposals come through the cycle, and we get a stack of proposals, usually in the hundreds every year or every 5 years, probably 90% of those proposals are coming from 5 states in the United States. And so everything we deal with on the committee that we don't generate within the committee itself is coming from 5 states in the United States, and the Northwest is not one of them. So we really have kind of lost our voice as far as the impact in the industry. And that's why I really want you to capture at the end my phone number. Don't waste your time going through the process. Just give me a call. Here are the changes I'm going to talk about real quickly. We have a number of changes, but these are the ones that really are going to impact us not only in our budgets, in our training, how we use the SCBA, but impact us regarding our lives and our safety. The first one is communication systems. As you all know, the SCBA at best is hard to communicate with. We have 2 types of communication primarily in the SCBA. One is face-to-face, one is SCBA to radio. Within the scope of NFPA 1981, we are not in a position to deal with SCBA to radio because there are so many radio possibilities out there with analog and digital packages and so on and so forth. And so what we're primarily focused on is SCBA communication to SCBA communication. The Electronic Safety Committee right now, chaired by Bobby Athanas with New York Fire, they are presently working on a fire radio standard. When that radio standard becomes the new standard, we'll then be able to try to draw that technology and incorporate it into the SCBA, so perhaps we'll then have a communication system via radio. The next is the E.B.S.S, End of Service Time Indicator. This is kind of a big deal. It's going to change how we do our business. NIOSH had a window in their standard that operated, the E.B.S.S had to operate between 20 and 25%. We now have a change of 33%. It no longer operates in a window, but NIOSH has identified a minimum of 25%. E.B.S.S, or buddy breathers, that's a big one, and probably the one that I'm going to spend most time on and is the more passion of all the issues is the SCBA thermal lens degradation. I know you've all heard about that. How does this advance now? It doesn't. Well, that's right. Thank you. That's why I didn't do that. Okay. Here's what we found regarding the communication systems in the past. All of us that are sitting around here know what it's like to talk with an SCBA. And it just isn't very good. And so there was a requirement in the past that we had a speaking diaphragm that had to perform to a certain standard. And very often what happened is that standard couldn't be met within the speaking diaphragm mechanism itself, and so the manufacturers would choose to take it up a notch, if you will, and they would have an electronic system. The electronic system would enhance it or bring it over the edge so it met the certification. But as we all know as firefighters, if it's an electronic, we're probably going to screw it up somehow. Or the batteries are going to go dead, or it's going to get wet, or something's going to happen. And then what's left with is the mechanical system that perhaps didn't work the way we wanted it to work in the beginning. So what we've required now is that we have a mechanical system. And we no longer are measuring just sounds, but we're actually measuring speech intelligibility. It doesn't really matter if I can make a good sound in an SCBA. If you can't understand the word I'm trying to tell you, we really haven't accomplished much except making an SCBA that makes a sound. So the new requirement is testing speech intelligibility. It's an objective test that actually tests the words, and STI is the communication system. As I said before, it's non-electronic. The requirement is every SCBA made in 2013 and on has to have a mechanical system, not a diaphragm, not a this or that, but it has to be mechanical in nature, and it cannot be electronic. You can have an electronic system, but it has to go above and beyond. It cannot bridge the gap between the dysfunction of the mechanical one, and you can't bridge it with an electronic one. You have to meet the non-electronic and mechanical one, and then if you can have an electronic one as well, but it has to meet its own standard, and it can't impact the non-electronic one by its failure. They both have to work independent. Any questions on that? Okay. E.B.S.S, end of service time indicated, we better known as our bell, low air alarm bell. As I said, NIOSH had a window of 20 to 25%. All of our SCBAs, the bell would go off between 25 and 20% going down. And when we started working with the NIOSH fire fatality investigators and near miss, what we time and time again found is that we had firefighters that were running short on that reserve air. In the very beginning of time when the SCBAs came out, they had reserve air. That was not get out air. It was not think about getting air. It was reserve air, just like in the diving industry, emergency reserve air. We chose to use that as our indicator of when to get out. And so we started getting out as we were in our emergency air. When we finally got ourselves in an emergency, very often we had very little air left for that real emergency. So what we determined was that we need to not have that be the case, and that was taken care of in NFPA 1404 SCBA training, and requires that you exit the IDLH prior to the activation of E.B.S.S. But the committee believed that 25% was not enough, and certainly 20 was not enough. And so what they decided was, and by default, NIOSH, the standard was NIOSH's standard. We just by default gave them the standard, 20 to 25%. We went to NIOSH and said we want to bump it up to 33. So what ended up happening was NIOSH changed their 20 to 25% window and made it a minimum of 25%. That then gave us the opportunity to raise it to 33% to be NFPA approved. So it's 25% minimum for a NIOSH certified SCBA, 33% minimum for an NFPA certified SCBA. Just so I'm telling you, because I hear it everywhere I go, this was kind of an underhanded, fancy wink or handshake to eliminate the 1,200 liter or a 30-minute cylinder. Absolutely didn't come into play. Now, I mean, obviously we knew that by bumping up 33%, it was going to impact every cylinder, and it was going to impact the smaller cylinders perhaps more than would impact the larger ones, but that was not the underhanded move to try to do it. Have no ambition. In fact, we've had 2 actual proposals to eliminate 30-minute cylinders, and they were rejected every time. So this was not intended to impact the 30-minute cylinder. It was of its own. 33% was the value we were trying to achieve. It also was not intended to affect the 1404 exiting the IDLH prior to the activation standard. It had no impact, didn't come into play. We knew it would impact it, but that was not part of what drove it. Here's how it really is going to impact all of you, regardless of what cylinder you have. 1,200 liter cylinder, better known as the 30-minute cylinder. Right now you have 3 minutes and 23, or 3 2/3 minutes. That's what you have right now. Now let me tell you, the NIOSH standard is based on 40 liters a minute. They base everything on 40 liters a minute. We breathe about 40 liters a minute right now sitting at the table. When you're in a fire, you're not breathing 40 liters a minute. In fact, what we found is typically we end up breathing around 70, 75, 80, somewhere in that range. NFPA standard is 103 liters a minute, so we bumped that even higher up. So when we did these calculations, they're based on 80 liters a minute. So more realistic of what we're really going to see impact your organization. 3 2/3 minutes, what you have right now in a 30-minute cylinder for reserve air. It was bumped up to 5 minutes. It gave you 1 1/3 minutes more. That's the real impact. That's the real impact you're going to see. In an 1,800 liter 45-minute cylinder, you had 5 2/3 minutes. Now you got 7.5. You gained about 2 minutes of reserve air. That's the real impact. And in a 1-hour cylinder, 2,400 liter, you had 7.5. Now you have 10, 2.5 minutes. That's just the black and white of it. I mean, you know, we can wonder what it's going to be, how it's going to impact us based on 80 liters a minute. This is what the real impact is. That's what's going to impact your department. Okay, E.B.S.S or buddy breather. First off, you probably know this already. We've talked about it at length at different times, but if you have a buddy breather now, or you had a buddy breather, or you used a buddy breather, they were illegal. They were not certified. They have not been certified. They, in fact, have been prohibited by NIOSH since 1984. The use of buddy breathers, the interconnecting of 2 SCBAs, the training on them, the selling of them, the advertising of them, all of it has been prohibited. So that's just the reality. So what we did, I went to the NIOSH director at the time and I said, why was the prohibition made back in '84? Was it technological or was it behavioral? Because if it's behavioral, then nothing's changed. We would still be buddy breathing. But if it's technological in nature, then perhaps over that 30-year period, we have now the technology to overcome the issues you had. NIOSH came back and said it was technological. So we started working with NIOSH to figure out what those technical challenges were, and long and short of it, they took it out of prohibition. And so what they did in 2013 is they approved buddy breathers, or E.B.S.S, emergency breathing safety systems, for structure firing SCBA use only. So structure firefighting SCBAs, you can now have a buddy breather. It's an accessory. I know our own department here, my old department here, and ones in the metro area, and certainly ones when you go around the country, you know that there are some departments that say, you have a buddy breather, you're going to injure my firefighter. Others will say, I need a buddy breather so I can protect my firefighter. So what we realized is there was a real split. So we decided we were not going to make this mandatory, we're going to make it an accessory. So if your organization wants a buddy breather, you at least have the guarantee that it's going to be approved, it's going to perform the way it's supposed to perform, and it meets all the standards identified. But you can either choose to have it or not. It's not a piece of mandatory equipment. The SCBA with an E.B.S.S must be capable of 206 liters a minute flow. That's basically double what a single SCBA. So if you got an SCBA that has a buddy breather on it, it is going to be designed to flow twice as much as a single SCBA would be on your back. Obviously, because there might be a time 2 people might be breathing on it. It's on the other side, or the downstream side of the first stage regulator. So if something goes to garbage with the high pressure side of your system, your cylinder frangible disc blows, or your RIT fitting blows off, or something like that happens catastrophic on the high pressure side of it, this plugs into the low pressure side so you're able to deliver air to the firefighter. So it's after the first stage. It must have a check valve. So when you disconnect and reconnect, you do not contaminate the hose on either side of it. It's 20 inches long as a minimum. It's 1 action to make the connection and 2 actions to disconnect the connection, so we don't have accidental disconnects. Okay? This is what I'm going to spend the rest of the time on, and I'll very briefly go over it. This is the SCBA lens thermal degradation, the changes we made to the standard and what drove those. October 29, 2008, as I told you earlier, we worked very closely with NIOSH. I got a phone call at home. It was from the lead investigator on this particular line of duty death. What was unique about this is they were there, they were on scene, they were standing there when they called me with his cell phone. Said, Dan, we have a firefighter that's perished. Surprisingly, what looked unique about this situation is the turnouts were in very, very, very good shape. Most of his equipment was in very good shape, but his lens was gone. It was gone. And they had suspected by the appearance and what they saw that this firefighter had died from obviously an assault to his airway. The ME results confirmed that that was a contributing factor in this firefighter's death. We had a name now. This wasn't theoretical. This was a real person. A real firefighter was gone. Send the hair up on the back of my neck because obviously the lens is gone and I'm just racking my brain instantly trying to think what in the world could cause this. And I couldn't come up with anything. But it obviously, my first thought was, you know, this was an anomaly, something unusual had happened. But the next morning, I set up an investigative task group through the committee. We appointed members from NIST, from National Institute for Standards and Technology, from UL, from the committee itself, all the manufacturers, and from NFPA, and from NIOSH, NPPTL. They started their investigation and their intent was to try to replicate exactly what we saw on that fire, but within 6 months we had 2 more firefighters that had died that looked exactly the same, and ultimately the ME reports showed that they had basically the same assault. We started feeling this panicky crunch on us because we had not come up with anything yet, and yet now we had another firefighter that was gone. Again, we had real names and we didn't have any real answers. To this date, there are some still under investigation right now, but to this date we've been able to attribute 8 to that exact same situation. Real names, real firefighters are no longer with us. 8. We never saw it before. Now we had firefighters die before, but we had firefighters now were dying of something we hadn't seen before. And they were all looking the same, and we were able, NIOSH was able to tie them together, and we have 8. These, I hope I don't mess something up here. This is one of the masks that was taken off that one firefighter I told you about. What was amazing to us as firefighters is that we saw obviously the degradation to the lens itself, but we also saw this unbelievable, pristine silicone and rubber components to the mask. Everything else was gone, but that was in bad shape. This was the other thing that really caught our attention. I'm sure it will as well as you. We saw the lens was ballooned outward. And we saw a clear line here of destruction on this side and like it came out of the box on this side. Also, the hood was in great shape. This really caught all of our attention. It wasn't just me, it caught all of our attention. What's going on here? These are some masks that showing the same type of thing. The rubber components in great shape, but the lens, in this case, completely gone. In all fairness, the first question that we had to ask and I had to ask is, what changes has the committee made that could make these impacts? Directly or indirectly? Something's going on that's new. Something's going on we haven't seen. What's causing it? So we went back and started just tearing the standard apart, trying to figure out if we had done something that could somehow have this kind of an impact, and we just weren't aware of it. But the reality is, after that work, we found that nothing in the standard could have that kind of an impact. In fact, we realized that after 15 to 20 years, we hadn't made any changes to the performance, either positive or negative, that would have any impact on the lens at all. And the manufacturers were using the same product as they had used in years past. Something else was going on, and we just didn't know what it was. So the second question was just that. What else has changed? If the standard hasn't changed regarding lenses, what else has changed in the fire world that could possibly have an impact? That was what we had to ask. This is the test we did, and I'll let you watch it here for a second. But I want you to pay attention here because we've all experienced it here, maybe not even realizing we experienced it. But you'll start seeing up here in this lens, you're looking from the inside of a lens, you'll start seeing the lens start to craze. TVF&R, Portland, the Port, everybody here, Clackamas County, Oak Grove, everywhere. We've seen lenses now that have crazing where before we didn't have crazing. We've seen it. We see it regularly now. About the time this lens starts crazing, we slowed it down and we're seeing that this lens has become soft enough that we're seeing movement from the lens on inhalation and exhalation from the mannequin. That's what condition is very, very close to when your lens crazes. If it crazes, you're right there. You're walking that line right now. Your lens is becoming that soft. Typical as firefighters, when we can't see through our lens, we go just like this, just like Pete's saying. We go like that and we try to wipe it. If you're in that condition, you're sticking your thumb or you're pulling the lens right out of the mask. That's just the reality. It sent a chill through every one of us sitting in that room. So here's the makeup of this. This is a mannequin that has lungs, that has a camera inside its eyeball. Has a hose coming from a breathing machine that's delivering air just like our SCBAs. It goes to a humidifier, so it very much is like what we inhale, we bring it in our lungs, we exhale it. So we're trying to make it exactly like a human being breathing. We're breathing at 40 liters a minute, so it's more at rest than the 80 liters I was talking about. We exposed this lens to 10 kilowatt per meter squared. I know that doesn't sound like, what does that mean? Well, it didn't mean anything to me. I'm a firefighter, you know, hot, temperature. Give me some hot, I know what hot is. I don't know what 10 kilowatts per meter squared is. But these scientists, that's what they measure things with. And what it basically comes down to, it's the heat release. It's the measure of the heat released. And it's measured in heat flux. And so the best way to explain it is that if you had a candle on a birthday cake, it's going to burn at a certain temperature. And you can get right up to that candle and you can put your hands right by it. But if you put 5,000 candles on that birthday cake, they're all burning at the same temperature, but the heat flux is different. It's putting out a different kind of heat, and that heat tends to be radiant heat instead of convected heat. In the same way, if you had a 4x4 and you lit the 4x4 and sat back and watched it, it might burn for 2 hours, and let's say it had a value of 200. Well, over 2 hours, that 200 would be released. But if you took that same 4x4 and you slivered it up into tiny, tiny pieces and lit it, and it went whoop, all of that release would have occurred almost instantly, and your heat flux would have changed. And it would have been radiant heat instead of convected heat. So that's kind of a front load to what happened here, because we did this test at 10 kilowatt per meter squared. We destroyed every SCBA that we put in front of it. Now we took those results, we sent it to another lab in New York, and we wanted them to do the exact same test to verify what we had done. They called me and said, I don't know what you got yourself twisted about. Every SCBA performed just great. I'd seen it with my own eyes. So we go to the lab to try to figure out what's going on, and one of the scientists with NIST just happened to say, did you use a radiant heat panel or did you use a convected heat panel? And they told us they used a convected heat. We used a radiant heat. All of a sudden we did the uh-oh. We all stopped and thought, uh-oh, is this the player here? Is this the game changer that we don't know about? And as they explained, there is a tremendous difference between the interaction of radiant heat waves and convected heat waves on equipment and human beings. Tremendous difference. All of a sudden we had the uh-oh minute. So we went to UL, and I know a lot of you have seen this already, but it's worthy of seeing again, I think, because what this does is UL took 2 rooms, same size, same content, same ignition source, everything exactly the same, but the room on the left is an legacy room. That's the old furnishings that we had when we were kids, you know, and this one here was basically bought all modern stuff, modern carpeting, modern drapes, modern Davenports, everything. And what we came to realize is, you know, obviously we got a different chemistry over here on the right in this new room, the modern room, as opposed to the legacy. Over here in this corner, we have an ignition source. It's starting to burn. Over here, we have the same one. Surprisingly, you look at this, you think, uh-oh, this isn't doing quite as well. What we don't see here is the chemistry that's going on. It doesn't even look like a fire yet. This one looks like a fire. But this is already producing some bad, bad stuff. And what we found is that this burns at such a different rate, with such a different chemical reaction, it's kind of like an earthquake. You know, 1 and 1 isn't 2. It's like 1 plus 1 is like 2,000. So it starts building on itself. We typically have most of our SOPs based on about a 30-minute flashover time from incipiency to the time we flash over. Most of our response times, what we do when we get on scene, our ventilations, all that's kind of based on what we knew was the case with this type of a fire. This is a whole different world here. And what we found is that what was being produced here in a very short period of time was radiant heat waves. When this fire gets big enough, it's going to produce radiant heat. But most of the time we come into it, we're dealing with convected heat. This is producing radiant heat, and it's producing it almost instantly. This chemical chain reaction that starts occurring is just amazing. Every time I see it, it just is amazing to me. Now all of a sudden we still got a pump can fire here, and we got something to deal with over here. We're still, based on our timeline here, going to have a flashover around 30 minutes. I'm going to keep this going for about 1.5 more minutes, and then we'll go to our next slide. But it's quite amazing. Again, same size, same furnishings, same everything. The only difference is what's in this room is more reflective of the real furnishings that you have now in most homes that we go to, in most businesses, most any place you go. Now, it might not be 100% full of these types of furnishings, but I guarantee if you bought anything in the last 15 years, it's more representative of this than that. What you'll see here is, again, we got a countdown here of about 30 minutes, and we'll see that just play out time and time and time and time again, just like it has in all of our training and all of our drills for all the years we've been doing it. Right here, we'll have a flashover, a fully consumed flashover in about 3 minutes and 45 seconds. In addition to the flashover and the production of radiant heat and the destruction that you see on the equipment and the firefighter, the other thing we found here is this consumes the oxygen so rapidly that we very often will arrive on scene, we'll do a size up that has nothing showing or light smoke showing. And we go inside the building, and unlike a backdraft or those types of things, we go inside and we get 10 or 15, 20 feet inside the building, and all of a sudden there's enough oxygen for this thing to take off again. And it takes off from that end to that end, and the whole place is doing what this is doing. But when you walked in, there was no fire at all. Time and time again. This test was not done one time. This was done many, many, many times. And we had the same result every time. Every time. Anyway, I know some of you have seen this before, but sometimes it's almost like it's good for us to see it again. 3 minutes and 40-second flashover. This one is still going in there with a pump can. Hasn't even really got going yet. And we're responding here. You know, we're already going down the road. We might have just been arriving. So then, I guess based on that question we asked, what has changed in the fire world? If it isn't the standard, if it isn't what we did with lenses, what has changed? I think we got some indications something has changed, and I think we see what those somethings might be. The fuel absolutely has changed. It's a game changer. The other thing that's changed is the heat. We know we're dealing with radiant heat more than we ever have before as opposed to convected heat. And we know that the destruction on the equipment and the firefighter is evidenced by radiant heat more than ever before. And we've also lost time. We have severely lost time. It is cut into how we do what we do. Now here's the one that becomes kind of heresy and starts me having to go out and look under my car with the mirrors in the morning. But here's the deal. You know, we gotta call it where it's at. What else has changed in our fire world in the last 30 years? Our turnouts have. When a lot of us were on the fire department, we had cotton coats, cotton liners, pair of hip boots, some Mickey Mouse gloves, and no hoods. We had TPP levels that were very, very low. On the average now, everybody sitting in this room has a TPP level, thermal protection performance factor of around 40, 45. That's a big, big deal. It's a big deal. Not only that, we're wearing hoods. I'm not criticizing them. I'm not criticizing them, I'm not finding fault with them. I'm just saying it's different. It's one of those things you got to plug in. You have to plug them in. And the other thing that we've lost, and really it's because of the one above, what we found in the investigations, is, we can pat ourselves on the back years ago that when we went to a fire, we charged our lines, we made sure we were low, we ventilated ahead of time, we got all the fans set up, we did all the things right. Quite honestly, it's because we couldn't do it any other way. When you had bare skin, if you couldn't go into the heat, you couldn't go into heat. That's all there was to it. You had to do things a certain way. You don't have to now. You can tell people to do it, but they don't have to. So consequently, what we see is firefighters standing upright. We don't coordinate ventilation. We don't have charged lines every time. You just don't need to. We are so well protected. We simply are very, very well protected. What happened initially with turnouts is we saw firefighters injured in flashover. They started identifying what that flashover temperature was, and they said, we need to give firefighters a margin of protection in case they're caught in a flashover. So they built within the turnouts this higher TPP level and vapor barriers and so on and so forth to protect us from that catastrophic event. Typical of the fire service, we used what was set aside as an emergency and we started adapting it into our normal daily life. Instead of getting down on the ground, we started walking in. Instead of fighting a fire from here, we went right to there. That's just the way it worked. That was the evolution of how it worked and how we got where we're at. I was asked to present our initial findings from the task group to the investigation and make our recommendations at the Emergency First Responders Thermal Characteristics Workshop in NIOSH in Pittsburgh. This is what I said. I said, my presentation at the workshop, my personal belief is that the improved thermal protection of the firefighters' outer garments, the turnouts, have reduced the firefighter's sensory ability to recognize catastrophic thermal environments. I just think it has. So if it has, we need to come up with some other way of being able to do what we do without relying on our ears and our backs and our whatevers to tell us we're in a bad situation. Within the scope of NFPA 1981, we said, okay, what can we do? Some of this stuff is behavioral stuff, but what can we do on the committee? And we did make some changes to address the issue. Here's one of the changes. This is a big deal. You got an SCBA on a mannequin sitting on a conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt goes down this room, and these doors open up, and the mannequin and the SCBA breathing at 103 liters a minute goes inside, and it's an oven 500 degrees F for 5 minutes. That's a big deal. It sits in this oven 500 degrees for 5 minutes and bakes. As soon as it comes out of the oven, still on that same conveyor belt, it's fully engulfed in flame. From top to bottom, fully engulfed for 10 seconds. It goes a few more seconds and then it drops. It has a vertical drop to see if anything falls apart on it. This is not a test that takes your SCBA and puts it back on the rig. This is a destructive test. In fact, the only pass-fail criteria to this is that the SCBA stays positive. It never goes negative. It never goes negative. So in other words, it might bend over here, it might droop over here, it might actually have a hole in it. But the point is that if the SCBA is performing at the levels it needs to perform and it stays positive when it's inhaling at that 103 liters a minute, you know that you've protected the firefighter because he's not going to get any contaminants and the heat in, it's all going to be blowing out. That's why the pass-fail criteria is just that, positive pressure. The other big one is 15 kilowatt per meter squared. Now we saw with that test we did earlier and why I went into detail explaining it at 10 kilowatt per meter squared. This tests 15 kilowatt per meter squared. That's a big, big deal. It destroys everything. One of the simple questions people ask all the time is, why don't you just make these lenses out of glass, tempered glass or heat-treated glass or something like that? And somebody will say, well, it's the weight and all that kind of stuff. The reality is, what you got to balance here is your SCBA lens has to have the capability of absorbing heat at the same time not being destroyed by heat. Because if you had a glass lens as an example, the radiant heat could penetrate right through the glass. So the lens would last forever and ever and ever, but the firefighter would be the one that would be burnt because it would go right through the lens. So we had to make something that was going to be absorbable and yet durable. That's how we came up with what we came up with. 15 kilowatt per meter squared, that's a big deal. Then I was asked a question, I think it was Fire Chiefs Magazine, and one of them said, okay, does this solve it? I think you know my answer. No, I don't believe this solved the problem, because what I believe is with the components we talked about earlier and the radiant heat and the new fuel, that if you just get this new lens that we made in 1981 and some other behavioral component doesn't change in how we do what we do, what we'll be talking about in 5 years from now is the next component we found that now is the failing point. This isn't going to solve the problem. It just simply isn't going to solve the problem. Everything we design has some limitations, and we'll never be able to make equipment that will take the place of the fire service knowing what they can, what they can't do, and requiring the discipline to stay within those limits. That's just what we have to do. It's what we had to do before, and it's what we had to do now. So then the question is, so what can we do now? Is it just gloom and doom and there's no answers? This is the number one thing that we're promoting around the country, and we did in the alert that came out from NIOSH and the NFPA. We need to go back and we need to look at our SOPs. And if our SOPs are still SOPs that are dealing with the fire that we saw on the left, then we are no different than those organizations. It's just that all the components are there. It's just the day. And it's by the grace of God that we're not there already. And I know we come very, very close very, very often. And if we're getting crazed lenses and we're getting that kind of stuff, we're very close. Those become those evidences that we're there, that we're in a different environment than we used to be in. So we need to reevaluate our SOPs. We need to do them realistically and straightforward and honestly. We need to know our equipment. You can contact your rep for your turnouts, contact your SCBA rep and say, okay, I need to know what these parameters are. What can we do and what we can't do? You know, we're seeing things with turnouts, not criticizing turnouts, but I'm saying we're seeing things that we didn't see before. As an example, you go into a fire, and because of the way the construction of the turnouts are made, it does such a wonderful job of protecting you from heat. The heat is captured in a layer of your turnouts. That's why all of a sudden you come out and you bend your elbow, and now all of a sudden you're screaming because your elbow's on fire, or somebody hits you on the back, or you bend your knee. It's because that heat is absorbed within the system, but it doesn't let you get next to your skin. So you need to just know how they work, why they work. You need to know that so when you're ordering TPP levels and those types of things, you understand what you're actually getting. And we need to, regardless if we feel it or not, we need to go back to the basics, and we need to look at the discipline of how we do what we do. We need to practice those same things. Most of these situations we were involved in, it was one of those, I can tell you in one particular one, we had firefighters that were I'll just say it, they weren't low, and they were just interacting. And within seconds they were gone. So there was nobody begging, screaming, calling for their moms, praying out loud. It was 1 minute they were doing it, the next minute they were gone. They had no idea that they were in the situation they were in. So again, we know we just need to look at the positive and negative of our turnouts. We know that the fuel has changed, less time, more aggressive, and it's producing more radiant heat than we ever had before. So here's something I want to tell you about, 2 things, and then we're done. We were able to make 2 TCC proposals to the Technical Correlating Committee. One of them gave us so much help by what David set up in DPSST and the work that TVF&R did, and that was giving us information regarding the cancer study. We were able to take that. In fact, Dave, I think it was just days later, we actually went back to Baltimore and were able to present their findings that they did right here at home. This again, this is us. This is not somebody else doing it. This is the valuable insights we get here. But the first proposal was this. Excuse me, that's the second one. I'm going to go back to the second one. The first proposal, let me just tell you, then I'll go to the other one. The first proposal was that we have a PPE certification. This is an ensemble certification. No longer are we going to promote testing SCBAs, helmets, gloves, boots, turnouts by themselves, independently. We go in with all of them. So we want to know how the ensemble works relative to each other component. And what that means And this is the scope, and again, this is where they wanted to take you out and do something to you, because what we said was we want to identify a predetermined design strategy sequence for PPE failure. You're going to design PPE failure? That's exactly what we promoted. We want to know that if this system is going to fail, this is how it's going to fail. Because right now what we found is that we have turnouts that are failing at a higher level than the SCBA. And so if the first indication that you're in trouble is your SCBA fails, we would say we want to make sure something else fails before the SCBA does. And that's exactly what we wrote in our scope, and exactly what the TCC accepted. Last soldier standing is the SCBA. We want to design them so that this ensemble goes in for a certification, everything else goes to garbage, your SCBA is still intact. You're slapping your back and doing everything to get out, and your SCBA is still working. Okay, that's the TCC task group that is in place right now. The second one is what we did thanks to the respiratory program we had done at DPSST. We are trying to petition NIOSH, CDC, and OSHA to recognize another atmosphere. Right now we have IDLH. We know what IDLH is. We have criteria for IDLH. And we know what we have to wear when we're in IDLH. But you know what? As soon as it's not IDLH, it's safe. Well, we believe it's not safe. And we believe the studies that we've had done and have been done, and the research we've done and the information we have are time and time again showing us that what we're involved in regarding overhaul is not safe. It might not be IDLH, but it's not a day on the beach. And so they accepted both of those, and they accepted the findings from TVFNR. And with those, they ended up putting in place a task group that right now is working on those two new proposals. In fact, we'll be leaving here in a few weeks for Minneapolis to deal with exactly those two things. Anyway, right here, right there, that's my phone number, and that's my email address. Don't get bogged down with the process. Don't get bogged down with the website. Don't get bogged down with writing proposals. Across the coffee table, shift change, something comes up, you think we need to know about it. It's your own personal thing and what you did in the engine house. Call that number, email me. I guarantee you we'll take it right to the committee. I'm not a dictator, I'm the chairman. It doesn't mean it's going to get passed, but it means we can get it to the floor, and that becomes that. So anyway, I thank you very, very much. Appreciate the time, and I really feel just thankful I got to come back home and share this information. So thank you very much. God bless you.